So, for literally thousands of years, people have known that inhaling polluted air isn't healthy. What has been less clear is what is it about polluted air that makes it so toxic? Now, this may seem really actually pretty obvious, but actually it isn't. And the reason for this is that polluted air is a complex mixture of gases, liquids, particulates, and identifying which of these components is the most toxic really is a challenge, especially so when you have none of the tools to be able to measure any of it. So in this video, I'm going to take you down a millennia-long journey through history of how people have first realized air pollution is a problem and the different ways in which we've tried to identify what specific components of air pollution cause the most harm. Humans have been exposed to man-made air pollution, aka smoke, since we discovered how to make fire tens of thousands of years ago. Caves that were once occupied by primitive man remain covered with soot today. We know that people have understood that air pollution adversely affects human health at least 2,000 years ago. We know this because they passed laws to regulate air quality. These laws were based on the commandment to love your fellow as yourself from the Mishnah laws, which were based on the Torah. In Israel, in the 1st and 2nd century AD, industrial practices such as the processing of carcasses, tanneries, and furnaces were regulated. Largely, this meant that industries needed to be moved at least 50 cubits out of town. All right, so flash forward 1,200 years, and the Hebrew philosopher and scientist Moses Maimonides drew parallels between the air quality of a city with that of the desert as, quote, waters that are befouled and turbid to waters that are fine and pure, unquote. Again, this is demonstrating that people are recognizing the air in the city as something uniquely harmful to human health. Now, move forward again another 500 years, and the scientific revolution begins, and people begin to develop better and more refined techniques to study how things work. In 1661, John Evelyn published Fumi Fumigenium, also called The Inconvenience of the Air and the Smoke of London. It is the first book describing the problem of air pollution in London. Specifically, he describes how air pollution in London was affecting the survival rate of children under 2 years of age. Industry again was identified as causing the problem, and like in the 1st century Israel, a similar solution was proposed, moving specific industries out of town. Now, remember, this is 100 years before the Industrial Revolution, and things were about to get worse. All right. So for thousands of years, people understood that inhaling air pollution from industrial sources was not pleasant. They knew it was bad, but they didn't really understand how bad. Like inhaling the polluted air is gross, but would it kill you? And if it didn't kill you right away, would it eventually kill you? Now, there were 4 events in the 20th century that demonstrated exactly how toxic air pollution can be. 3. In the early 20th century, a part of Belgium called the Meuse Valley was a densely populated area with 27 factories that produced fertilizer, explosives, zinc, and steel. In early December of 1930, 63 people whose age ranged from 20 to 89 were killed by an air pollution episode. This has been identified as the first scientific proof that atmospheric air pollution can cause death and illness. Now, while the production of air pollution is clearly the source of the problem, weather patterns will also play a role. Now, typically, the warmer air produced by an urban environment will move up through the atmosphere and downwind of the source due to temperature gradients. Temperature inversions, however, are a natural phenomenon that will affect how air moves through the atmosphere. Specifically, they can trap the air within the area below a temperature inversion. In October of 1948, in Donora, Pennsylvania, one such temperature inversion occurred. This held the emissions from the local steel factories and formed a thick yellowish smog that held over the town for 5 days. 6,000 of the 14,000 residents reported respiratory problems and 20 were killed. Within a month, another 50 would pass away due to respiratory problems. This event has been credited with starting the clean air movement in the United States of America. Research into the Donora smog event by renowned toxicologist Mary Amdor found that low levels of sulfuric acid, a byproduct of coal burning, leads to shortness of breath and lung disease. Her attempts to publish her results led to her being physically threatened, her funding being pulled, and the loss of her job at Harvard School of Public Health. This established the problematic tradition of moneyed interests using their power and influence to silence research they do not like. This strategy would become popularized by another industry that sells inhalable products. The final location was in London, England, where over a 5-day period in 1952, a temperature inversion coupled with the heavy fogs of London formed a thick smog that led to the death of over 4,000 people. If you're wondering what it was like, the Netflix series The Crown had an episode that took place during the smog event that I thought was well executed. Now, in response to this event, Britain passed the Clean Air Act. And in 1962, again in London, the exact same meteorological conditions as December 1952 happened, yet again, but this time, the death toll was lowered from 4,000 to just 700, demonstrating that clean air legislation saves lives. All right, so by the mid 20th century, the association with exposure to elevated levels of air pollution and the loss of human life was abundantly clear. What was less clear was what were the specific components of air pollution that led to the loss of human life. Was it the gases? Was it the liquids? Was it the solids? The particulates? How did people figure out what mattered the most? A major challenge in trying to figure out what it is about air pollution that causes adverse health effects is you can't simply expose a population of people to one type of air pollution and expose another population to clean air and then measure the difference. For obvious reasons, you can't do this. And you also can't simply compare the health outcomes between, say, countries, since so many other factors will also play a role in population health. Okay, then, so what do you do? Well, in science, researchers can use something called a natural experiment to learn a great deal about cause and effect. In a natural experiment, large-scale factors out of control of the scientists will take place, and the net effect of the change on the individuals in the population can be observed. For example, in 1973, OPEC imposed an oil embargo, and as a result, many parts of the US would have to change the fuel they used from burning high-quality oil to low-quality coal. And as we discussed earlier, the burning of coal was known to play a major role in both the London events and those in Pennsylvania. Thus, there was an opportunity to study how an increased use in coal would lead to changes in public health. Dr. Benjamin Ferris and Frank Spicer of the Harvard School of Public Health recognized this and put together the Harvard Six Cities Study. This landmark study followed a cohort of 8,111 adults across 6 American cities. Over a decade and a half, they were questioned about their medical history and lifestyle. This data was then compared with the measurements of ambient air pollution. After 15 years, when the data across the cities was compared, a clear trend was found. Fine particulate air pollution contributed to excess mortality. The findings of this study led to a larger epidemiological study headed by the same original authors. Termed the American Cancer Society Study, more than 550,000 adults across 151 urban areas were interviewed over a 16-year period. The findings of this study supported the previous work, confirming that exposure to fine particulate air pollution led to much higher mortality rates. To be clear, the Harvard Six Cities study is a groundbreaking piece of research. It, along with countless follow-up studies that it inspired, have fundamentally changed how we understand air quality. All right, so in the 90s, it became abundantly clear that particulate matter was the problem. And so for this reason, the concentration of particulate air pollution in most cities and towns is readily reported, and portable particle counters have become very popular as they allow people to essentially judge how healthy the air they're currently breathing in actually is. Okay, so now you have all this access to the concentration of particulate air pollution. What do you do with this information? Particulate air pollution, also referred to as PM 2.5, is the concentration of all the aerosol under 2.5 microns in diameter in a given volume of air. PM 2.5 is reported in units of micrograms per meter cubed. Like any pollutant, the amount you can be exposed to will depend on the length of time of the exposure. For example, the WHO recommends that the average PM2.5 concentration that a person is exposed to over the course of a year should not exceed 5 micrograms per meter cubed. Over a 24-hour period, they recommend that the average PM2.5 concentration should not exceed 15 micrograms per meter cubed. All right then, if the exposure should never exceed these values, what then is the ideal value? Well, the authors of the 6 studies published an extended follow-up where they explored this question. What they found was that an increase in PM2.5 concentration of 10 micrograms per meter cubed resulted in an increase of 16% to the death rate due to cardiovascular disease and lung cancer. What they also found is that reducing the PM2.5 concentration by 10 micrograms per meter cubed led to a reduction in mortality rate by 27%. What this means is that any change in particulate exposure matters a lot, and any reduction in particulate air pollution will improve health outcomes. All right, so what do you do on days when the reporting of the air quality is poor or the PM2.5 you are measuring with your personal detector is high? Well, one solution is to simply change your location. Another is to change the local environment. This may involve something as simple as closing a window when the air pollution is coming from the outside, or opening the window when the air pollution is coming from the inside. And of course, wearing a mask will always lower your exposure to particulate air pollution. So knowing that exposure to elevated levels of particulate air pollution can lead to adverse health effects is one thing. Understanding why is another thing entirely. So in a future video, I'm going to explain what happens to your body when you breathe in particulate air pollution and how it affects everything. In short, it affects more than just your lungs. So with that, I hope you found that interesting. If you liked, please like. If you want to see more of these, please subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, please ask in the comment section below or approach me on Blue Sky or Twitter. Yeah, and with that, Mix has all the references I used to make this video.